Uma boa tarde, sejam bem-vindos. Estamos dando início à transmissão da 18ª Semana do Cravo. Antes de começar, eu gostaria de transmitir para vocês a mensagem do diretor da Escola de Música da Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro, o professor Ronald Silveira.
Olá a todas e todos, eu sou Ronald Silveira, diretor da Escola de Música da UFRJ, e é uma honra poder dar início a esta 18ª Semana do Cravo. Esta iniciativa do professor Marcelo Fagerland é tão importante que pode-se dizer que existem dois momentos do cravo no Brasil nas últimas décadas, um antes da Semana do Cravo e outro depois. Este evento já permitiu o compartilhamento entre grandes professores, intérpretes, musicólogos e aproximou mais o cravo dos estudantes e do público em geral. Este ano nós temos a ilustríssima presença da premiadíssima professora e musicóloga Florence Gertrude. Miss Gertrude, we are very happy with your presence. Your participation is an honor for us. We look forward to your lessons and wish these days to be happy for you too. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. Ao professor Marcelo Fagerland e a toda a equipe que está realizando este evento, parabéns e uma excelente Semana do Cravo para todos.
Bem, eu gostaria de, em primeiro lugar, agradecer as palavras do professor Ronald Silveira, diretor da Escola de Música, e, continuando os agradecimentos, também agradecer ao vice-diretor da escola e diretor artístico, Marcelo Jardim, e demais diretores adjuntos. Também uma palavra de agradecimento aos coordenadores dos programas de pós-graduação, o PPGM e o Promus, respectivamente João Vidal e Aloysio Fagerland. Também agradecer muito a parceria com a Universidade Federal de Juiz de Fora e a Universidade Federal de Pernambuco, e ainda umas palavras especiais a Mária Pereira e Maria Barroso, colegas das instituições, que estão aqui comigo na organização e coordenação da 18ª Semana. E também ao José Guilherme Alain, nosso colega do UFPE, que está dando o suporte técnico para que o evento transcorra tranquilamente no modo remoto. Bom, caros participantes, é com muita alegria que eu dou as boas-vindas à 18ª Semana do Cravo. Gostaria de agradecer a presença de vocês e a colaboração dos alunos e dos colegas professores que participam dessa edição. Nesse segundo ano, que realizamos de modo remoto, temos a honra de contar com a professora Florence Gertrude, responsável pelo curso de iconografia e organologia do cravo. Em conversas anteriores, a Florence disse que sempre ela é apresentada, Florence Gertrude não precisa de apresentações, mas precisa sim, porque, enfim, eu acho que tem tantas coisas bonitas na sua biografia que valem a pena serem lembradas. Bom, é um currículo muito extenso, eu tive que fazer um resumo, então vamos lá. Ela é diretora emérita de pesquisa do CNRS, que é o Centro Nacional de Pesquisa Científica da França, desde 2016. Nessa instituição, ela foi diretora de pesquisa de 2005 a 2016. Atuou como pesquisadora do Instituto de Pesquisa do Patrimônio Musical na França, de 96 a 2013, e lá ela foi diretora de 2004 a 2013. Foi professora associada de organologia e iconografia musical no Conservatório Nacional Superior de Música e Dança de Paris, de 94 a 2016, onde ainda atuou como curadora do Museu Instrumental. E ela foi chefe do projeto do Musée de la Musique em La Villette, o museu instrumental que muitos conhecem. Bom, a sua formação se deu na Universidade de Paris-Sorbonne, Paris 4, doutorado em organologia, mestrado em História da Arte, licenciatura em Literatura Moderna e História da Arte na Universidade de Aix-Marseille. E realizou seus estudos musicais no Liceu Musical de Marseille. Bom, muitos são os prêmios da sua carreira. Eu destaco o prêmio Claire Brook, de 2018, concedido pela City University of New York. É um prêmio, foi o primeiro prêmio outorgado para o seu livro Voir la musique, pela sua contribuição de longa duração e excepcional no campo da iconografia musical. Bom, Florence Getreau é comendador da l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres, em Paris, 2017, e recebeu o prêmio Kurt Sachs, da Sociedade Americana de Instrumentos Musicais, em 2002. Bom, a sua extensa bibliografia contém 36 obras pessoais e coletivas, 119 artigos e capítulos e obras científicas e 171 outras contribuições, incluindo 22 estudos, 80 textos para catálogos de exposições, 319 entradas de dicionários e 40 resenhas. Um lembrete aos que estão nos assistindo e que queiram fazer perguntas ou comentários após a aula da professora Florence, deverão utilizar o chat. E lembramos também que aqueles que desejarem um certificado de participação do curso deverão preencher o formulário que será compartilhado ao final da aula. Então, tudo isso vocês vão encontrar no chat. Florence Getreau está na França, mas está muito perto de nós. Alguns dos professores atuais participaram como alunos na segunda Semana do Cravo, em 2005, ocasião em que Florence esteve no Brasil e deixou muitas lembranças. Tantos anos depois, achamos que uma boa maneira de comemorar os 18 anos do evento seria tê-la novamente conosco. Obrigado, Florence, por estar na Semana do Cravo. Chère Florence, tu es en France, mais très proche de nous. Certains des professeurs actuels ont participé en tant qu'élèves à la 2e semaine du clavecin en 2005, occasion pour laquelle tu étais au Brésil et as laissé de nombreux souvenirs. Bien des années plus tard, nous avons pensé qu'une bonne façon de célébrer les 18 ans de l'événement serait de t'avoir à nouveau avec nous. Merci, Florence, de participer à la semaine du clavecin. Bom, nós vamos continuar em inglês, que vai ser a língua através da qual a Florence vai ministrar o seu curso. Well, now we continue in English, and Florence, please.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Très bien.
Et je voudrais vous demander à tous si je parle trop bas ou trop fort. If I speak too low or too aggressive, to show it to me, because very often I suffer by such video conferences because the tone is not very good regulated. So be so kind to say it. And my first words, as you probably see, is to say I'm very moved about your words, dear Marcello, dear trio who organized this nice exchange, I would say. You are right to say we are not very far from each other because we stayed in contact. I have a wonderful remembrance of my staying in Brazil, but also when Marcello was in Paris as a postdoctoral PhD young doctor. And he worked very wonderful in the Department of Music in the National Library. It was a nice period. He even published in my journal, what was an honor. And I think these are created a definitive link between us. So thank you for your words. I am a bit frightened to have to speak so long alone so far, and I hope I will not bother you. I hope you will express that you have enough when you have enough. I would also say that I prepare, or I am preparing, a bibliography that I hope Marcello will be able to disseminate to all of you who will ask for it. If not, okay, but it will be ready on Friday. You know, I am always thinking maybe I will have a last idea, and I do not want to give it too early. So be sure you will find all the references of the bibliography at the end of the course. The second thing is that I am ready to receive emails from all of you, and on the first screen that you will soon see, you will be able to see my email, write it down, and later, if you have any question, not only together today, but if you have a special question, write to me and I will answer when I can, but I will answer. It is my duty. So don't hesitate. Okay? To prepare us today, I will concentrate first on two, I would say, regional schools of harpsichord, I would say building, but also social aspects, and not the music. You have professors for music, you are practicing, so you know the repertoire. I will more concentrate on the building, the aspect of instruments, the symbolic of the instruments, their social place, their development, the link between different schools, etc., and the evolution. And I think we will have a break after half of my first conference. It means maybe in 45 minutes, when I will have already treated Italy. Then we have a break of 5 or 10 minutes, and then I will study with you Low Countries. Tomorrow, I will work on France. France from the very beginning to the France of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, to speak about the revival of harpsichord, a question very actual in Brazil, I think, because of the very good book of Marcello and his group of scholars. And the third course on Friday will be devoted to the clavichord and to the pianoforte. But it is each time a huge subject. So before to work deep with you, I would like to apologize that I am quite, I'm conscious, I am very European oriented, too much French oriented. So please be sure, I am conscious it is not the reality. The reality is that quite each land had a special and a specific school of making, an aesthetic and an evolution, sharing aspects with other countries, other regions of the world. So don't think that I see the whole history of our dear harpsichord only for me. And write me if you have any, I would say, reaction or contest. I am ready for a contest. Okay? So many, many thanks for the idea to share this knowledge. My knowledge is not universal, and very often I will share with you things that I loved, or I was astonished about, or I worked on or I discovered them with pleasure. I think emotions are very important also when we decide to dig on a subject of early times. Okay? Do you think my voice is good, medium, and understandable?
Florence, it's perfect. We hear you quite well. No problem at all.
Good.
Thank you.
So now I will share my screen, okay? Is it okay? So I hope I see you on the right, not to be too alone in my house.
Don't be afraid if you don't see us, we are here. No problem, okay?
Okay. You have the telephone. You can call me also, huh?
Sure.
Can you see my screen?
Very well.
Very well. Can you see my email?
Very well.
Good. So everybody can write the email for later. So once again, I show you the content of the 3 days courses. Today, we will speak about the historiography of the harpsichord knowledge, then the beginning of the story, then Italy, and finally Low Countries. And I think it is very important each time we work on a subject, on a question, on a field, to be aware who already worked a lot on the subject. And already in the 19th century, there was very interesting scholars. There was books, there was articles, and there were realizations, restorations, building, etc. But I decided to begin with, I would say, very scholarly books, largely disseminated. And for me, one of the first is Raymond Russell. Why? Because Russell wrote that book because he was in charge of a very important collection in Edinburgh. So he was an harpsichordist. He was somebody who was aware of the making. He was working and studying a collection of early instruments. It means he had the very concrete and material sources. And this gave a very good book, already quite actual. And I show you the content of the book because you see that he shared the knowledge in different, I would say, geographical regions. For example, Italy, Low Countries, France, British Islands, and Germany, and together a big block with Scandinavia, Central and Eastern Europe, Spain, and he ignored your country. He ignored South America and Brazil. But what is very interesting is the appendixes. You know, there was one, for example, on Bartolomeo Cristofori, who was an enormous maker in Florence at the time of the Medici, and who is one of the potential maker who did the first pianofortes. He gave also a sort of portrait of who was Leopoldo Franciolini. I do not know if you know who is him. We probably will speak about him tomorrow, but it was very important at the time of Raymond Russell to suddenly say clearly that Franciolini was a strange person in Italy, in Firenze, who built fakes or forgeries, or I would say harlequins, with pieces of old harpsichords and rebuilding them in a modern way to buy them with quite high prices. So it was interesting. Another subject, the Guild of St. Luke in Antwerpen, was also very pertinent, because as you will see, this professional association was very important for the, I would say, the growing of making in Antwerpen, in Low Countries. Then there is, for example, an important letter from Constantin Huygens, who was a scholar and who wrote to many people in Europe about scientific things, about music, about what was happening in Europe at that time, everywhere. So I think the idea of giving all these documents was very interesting. Then he gave also the inventory of harpsichords from the nobility in France at the moment of the revolution, or the instruments of the King of England. You know, I mean, all these appendixes are still very useful today, and I very often open my Russell to look at this first publication of that documents. So I would say, look at Russell. It is not old-fashioned, even if the knowledge on the regional schools had many improvements in the late half century. A second very important book is the what was the PhD of Frank Hubbard. Frank Hubbard was a maker, but also a scholar in Boston. And this is very special, once again, to be not only a musician or not only a maker, but to be also somebody with intellectual wishes. And he wrote this history of the harpsichord in a time where many museums were beginning quite systematically to think about putting old instruments back in order for playing. I am especially, I would say, near to Frank Hubbard. Why? Because in 1967, he could come in Paris at the invitation of Madame Geneviève Thibault de Chambure. This lady was a very important person in France. She was a musicologist. She was a collector of early instruments. She had 800 early instruments. It is enormous. She was organizing concerts with La Société de Musique d'Autrefois. And Madame de Chambure, she was already 60 years old, was nominated curator of the Musée Instrumental in the Conservatoire of Paris. It means that she immediately, because she had reactions like a collector, like somebody who had instruments to make concerts, she wanted to restore, first of all, the harpsichords from the Musée Instrumental. And because she was quite already international, she was educated in English with a lady at home speaking English. So she decided to ask, I would say, the updated knowledge persons, and Frank Hubbard was one of them. He stayed in France 2 years, and he opened, I can say, the workshop to restore harpsichords in the Conservatoire of Paris. It means that there is traces of his work in many instruments in the Parisian collection. He gave courses of organology in the museum with Madame de Chambure, and he trained many people. He had an enormous impact, and I think Monsieur Mercier, for example, who was later a maker in Paris, probably had a part of his, I would say, vocation, listening and to Frank Hubbard and coming to have contact with him. if you look at the contents of his book, you see that it is once again classified regionally: Italy, Flanders, France, England, Germany, and something very new, because probably he was a maker, the workshop. This is also interesting, this special aspect, how he was working a workshop for harpsichord. He collected also some appendix on all technique aspects, for example, the pedal, or the Bach disposition, or what is a clavier organum, or the very important manuscript of Pierre Trichet, who was a man absolutely contemporary from Mersenne, writing a treaty, but not publishing it. It is in form of a manuscript preserved in the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève. And Frank Herbert probably found that it was important to give it to the public, because it was, I forget to verify, but maybe it was not yet published by François Le Sur. It was the same period that François Le Sur decided to publish it. So you see, we have already two books. Frank Herbert book for French-speaking people was translated by Hubert Bédard in 1972 in French, by Hubert Bédard, who was, I would say, the successor of Frank Herbert in the Parisian workshop. So don't hesitate to read the translation. It was very accurately done, because as I said, you know, the successor of Frank Herbert was a Canadian. He spoke very good French, and he was helped by a lady, Félia Bastet. So the translation is very, very good made. Now I come to a very different book, also quite later. You see, 1985. And you see the title, Atlas der Profile. What is that? It is on an instrument. I hope you see the right side of the screen or not. Do you see the right part of the screen?
Yes, we do.
Because there are in black, you see in black, all the forms of the moulure, of the molding. Do you see the molding? Yeah?
Yes, we do see.
Okay. So what is wonderful in that book is that Friedemann Helwig was first trained as a violin maker, because her father was a violin maker in Lübeck. And so he was aware with hands and with making of instruments. Then he studied chemistry, and he was very good in chemistry. And later he get a position in Nuremberg in the Germanisches Nationalmuseum, where he was a restorer, and later the director of the, I would not say the workshop. It was a new period beginning with him. It was a laboratory to study, and not only to restore, but to conserve. He was one of the first, with a group of an American and a Canadian person and a Swedish person, to make us, all people using museum or working in museum, that conservation is more important than restoration à toute force. Friedemann immediately understood that the molding of harpsichords are very important, because they are a sort of signature. Each maker is using a special tool to create his own molding in very different places of the instruments, along the instrument, at the top of the ribs, or at the the corner of the keyboards, everywhere there is moldings, and the shape of these moldings are quite a signature of each workshop. Do you understand what I mean? It means it is like to show the taste of a maker, you know. The way to work is not the same in Italy, in Netherlands, in Germany, etc. But even in each country, each maker is no way to make moldings. So what Friedemann did for not only harpsichords, but also clavichords and square pianos, was to study systematically all the instruments with keyboard in his own museum, and to deliver us this wonderful knowledge. And this is one of the entries. It means for each instrument, he gave the list, the place, and the shape of each molding. So today it is still an enormous resource for people working on the identification of instruments in each country. And I think makers use it a lot, but it is important that you as harpsichordists are aware that these details are very important to identify an instrument without a signature, you know, because comparing the molding, you can say, oh, it is quite like a Pisaurensis or a French harpsichord made in Paris. Okay, so once again, a good book. Now I come to Edward Cote. You see, we are in 2003, and I think you should buy that book. I am very direct, because when you see the contents, you can realize that the knowledge is now so big that we are more, I would say, our knowledge is more refined. We understand that there was many exchanges between countries, for example, between Low Countries and England, between Germany and Low Countries, between Italy and France, between Low Countries and South America. Why? Because musicians transported their own instruments, because the makers exported, because they were famous, etc. So the landscape of making changed a lot during the last 30 years. And what is wonderful in Kotik is, as you see, he did a more chronological approach, because he's even speaking of a sort of international model of harpsichords at the end of the 17th century, because he understood that there was a sort of mix of influences, and the regional aspects of making were not so closed with, I would say, borders. You know, it goes through the borders. So it is very interesting. And I am not only happy to see this more, I would say, how could I say, it is not so sharp defined. He understood that influences are sometimes quite clear. For example, in Lyon, Italy is quite sensible because we are more to the south of France, and Low Countries are more sensible in Paris because we are more near from the north of Europe, etc. And you can't have a too systematic view of the characteristics. The second thing very interesting is that he devoted a whole chapter on 19th and 20th century harpsichord making. And this is quite interesting. He's not the first. I must say that our colleagues in Berlin, with Dr. Turner, at the time when Dr. Berner was the director, already was very conscious that what happened during the first revival of Baroque music at at the end of 19th century was quite important for also the making of replicas. There were not very strict replicas, as we will see tomorrow, but to devote a chapter and to care, to give elements, how they were built, after which models, with which concepts, influenced by what. And we will see very influenced from the modern piano making. All this was very important because I suppose the teachers of your teachers were trained on such instruments. So we have to know them. And there is prominent people like Wanda Landowska, every harpsichordist knows the name. We have to know what she played. She had early instruments, but she had also modern harpsichords, and she was somebody very effective in promoting new models, you know, from the firm Pleyel, for example. So that book is for me, I would say, indispensable. Then, because you are harpsichordist, I think it is important that you read the quite recent book from edited by Mark Kroll with a group of scholars on the harpsichord. It is mainly about the music, about what you are playing with your professors. But there is an introductory chapter about the making of harpsichords, very short, but wonderfully synthetic, written by John Coster. Who is John Coster? I think it is one of the biggest scholars in our time on harpsichord making. He knows a lot, and he has a spirit to give us, I would say, the cream of the knowledge in this first chapter. So if you have the chance to buy that book, please first read John, and you will be aware of the very important things on the evolution of your instrument. And I opened an open door when I said that you have to buy the book O Cravo, no Rio de Janeiro, because it just issued during our hard period. And it is wonderful that a group of your professors joined and wrote this story of what happened in your country. I am so happy. You know what I would like also is to put on the right Mayra Pereira book, but I don't have it. So I could not put it on the screen. I am so sorry. But read also what she did as a PhD. I think it is a wonderful way to be, I would say, partie prenante of what is happening in your, I would say, not only country, but it is larger, I think. When I was in Rio, 16 years ago, I was astonished, in German we say verblüfft, of the knowledge that Maya already had on European making, but also on exportations of European instruments in your country. It was lovely to discuss with you. So please take that work in account, and I hope it is inspiring for you all if you have to write, for example, a master or a PhD. Wrote on your own field. It is wonderful for us all abroad. Okay, then I am a bit long because I think it is important that you know where are the very good books. If you are looking for a maker, please work with Donald Boach, the third edition prepared by Charles Moult, and you will be horrified that many makers from Brazil are not inside. So I hope that once again there will be a another edition with all of what you know about regional making in Brazil. On the right, it is something different. It is a section that I think you should be conscious of the existence. Catalogs of collections are also very important for us. Why? Because since the book you see on the screen from Hubert Henkel, I am sorry, it is an H, it's not Henkel, it is Henkel, it's a mistake of me. Since that catalog, there is wonderful and systematic catalogs of museums done, section per section. Not general catalogs with all the type of instruments, but specialized catalogs on keyboards and on harpsichords and clavichords and pianoforte. Hubert Henkel was working in East Germany in a difficult time, in Leipzig, where there is an enormous collection of keyboards, because it is coming from Köln. There was a very important collection in 1930 in Köln, and it was partly purchased by Leipzig. Henkel had a systematic approach. He decided to describe very seriously each instrument, to give measures, to analyze the woods, to give the length of the strings, to study the bracing, the mechanism, to give a bibliography, to give also many plates with diagrams, and it was a model. There is only one problem. It is so, I would say, scientific. It is sometimes very hard to understand, and it is in German. So it's not very easy as approach, but a wonderful work. And then I suggest that if you want a model, please take the catalog of the harpsichords in Boston, you know, from John Koster. Later, there was many other very good catalogs. For example, London Royal College of Music, published in 2000 by a group of scholars, and very recently, as you probably heard, the systematic catalog only of the Ruckers, not of all harpsichords or virginal, but only of the Ruckers dynasty from the museum in Brussels. So you see, we are now quite happy. And why do I say John Koster is a model? Because look, it is in English, it means easier to understand. And he was inspired by Henkel. So this is an entry. Denomination, for example, it would be written harpsichord with a virginal inside, or claviciterium, you see, or a wink spinet, for example. Then you have the maker, the number, okay, the provenance. And when it is seriously made, the provenance is very important, because you understand if the instrument was something belonging to an amateur, to a carpenter, or to an harpsichordist, or to a scholar, and this is has consequences. Very often a musician will be fond of the tone. He will restore the instruments, and very often modernize it, transform it. If it is a collector of, for example, art objects, he will not transform the instrument. So be careful from where an instrument is coming. Then the references were very developed in John Koster's book. And the description is so systematic. Excuse me, I see that I wrote stringing without G. I worked too quick. And it is so well described, you know, the inner construction, the string lengths, etc. It is lovely. And what is very special is for each instrument, there is minimum 3 or 5 or pages of comments. I think very few catalogs are so informative. And there is footnotes. Okay. So I think it is no more available, but it is in libraries. Okay, friends, I hope I am not too boring. I hope that you still have some energy. I would like to now come inside the knowledge and to show you what was the theory of the, I would say, the origin of the harpsichord, coming from the psalterion. Then half a psalterion is a mi-canon, a canon, you know, this plucked instrument, a sitar, and a table sitar. And if you put a keyboard on a half canon, you will have a clavicimbalum. Okay, so this is maybe an explanation. And if you look at one of the very first manuscripts describing an harpsichord, we see that proportions are not very far from Alb mi-canon. You know, this manuscript is quite famous. It was written by Arnaud de Zwolle. Zwolle is a very small city in Belgium today, in the Flanders, and it was never published. It exists only as a manuscript. And what is strange is that in that manuscript, there is 2 types of mechanism, a plucked mechanism and a hammered mechanism. Then if you think I am quite crazy to say our harpsichord is coming from a mi-canon, look at this detail of a very famous altar from the school of Van Eyck, today in the Museo del Prado. You see that instrument plucked by an angel with a pencil, with a quill. It is really the form of a harpsichord, but without key, without keyboard. So the origin is quite clear. Huh? And you have also the plectrum. Other evidences are given, for example, by this sculpture in a church in Manchester, where you see the angel playing a real keyboard. And what is wonderful is that we see the jacks, the rail of jacks. This is wonderful as a document. It's quite early. And here, a drawing quite well known, very often reproduced, showing 2 shapes of instruments. At the top, what we would say a spinet or virginal, because it is rectangular. It means the keyboard is on the length of the box, of the case. And you have also a small harpsichord put also on a table. So you see, they are dated, and we are from the end of the 15th century to the 16th century. Among, I would say, the proto-harpsichords, there is this unbelievable clavicitherium, it means upside harpsichord, preserved in the Royal College of Music, and probably dating from 1480. Now we think it was made by in Germany by a German master. And on the right of the screen, I show you the shape of how the jacks can work because of this upright form of instruments put on a table. Okay, it is not very easy. I would like that you notice on the soundboard of this instrument that there is many roses, and the roses are in shape of a Gothic window. This is absolutely important because you will see that this characteristic will stay in the very early instruments in low countries. So we have iconographical documents. We have text, as we saw, the manuscript of Arnaud de Tzwoll. But we have, since the beginning of printing, treatises printed by scholars. One of the very first is from Sebastian Birdung. And you know what is very sympathetic in that book is that there is plates, and Andreas Silvanus, the master, is explaining all and sharing his knowledge with, I think, Sebastian. And they are discussing, exactly like in Roma, like in the antiquity, you know. The master is explaining things and asking, do you understand? And the pupil is telling, I understand nothing. Can you repeat or explain me a detail? And all the book is a dialogue, and like if the master is speaking to you. The book is on all type of instruments, and there is, it is a luck for us, some plates showing the shape of instruments, but they are quite crude. They are not very well designed. And as you see, the virginal is quite like the clavicemballum. And what is interesting is there is a claviciterium, the upright form of the harpsichord. And the text is not very informative. Later, we have Praetorius. This treatise is 1610, as we see on the first on the cover, on the front page. And what is wonderful is that Praetorius was a composer. It means he will bring inside many aspects from the music, from the practice of music, from his knowledge of musicians crossing Europe and coming. For example, he's writing about a dance meister coming from France, and he's transcribing dances from France. So as you see, once again, there is a mix of influences. And here you see the tribunes of singers in a church with many brass instruments, and it's very informative. Inside, what I think very special is that he's presenting the instruments not only per type, but also per, I would say, tessiture. It means all the instruments working in the very bass. It means the violone. As you see, octave, excuse me each time I mistaped, but octave posaune, and the gross doppel oboe, as you see. All these are instruments to make the accompaniment, and the harpsichord is a part of them. So it is interesting to see that he's working after the function in the music and not only about the typology. There is a plate showing spinet and virginal, and this is interesting because you see first that you can have a squared shaped spinet and the keyboard is inside, and you can have a polygonal spinet, but the keyboard is outside. And this will be used centuries long as genuine models in Italy, in Low Countries, in Germany, in England, etc., even in France. And what I think is also wonderful is that Praetorius is giving the length of a foot, so you can measure an instrument. It is the first time. It is very precise, and okay, it is the foot of Germany where he's working. It is not Augsburg. I forget the city. I think it was on the title page, Wolfenbüttel. You see, it was published. So it is a foot of Wolfenbüttel, probably. But okay, you can reconstruct later how long were the instruments. And what I love on that is also the tools. You see, there is a tuning fork, there is a small knife to prepare your jacks and to regulate your instruments. It is so concrete, so practice. So look in detail at Praetorius. Now we come to the real preserved models. For example, this square spinet, but this time you see the keyboard is outside, and another type, the keyboard is inside, and there is a box to protect the instrument. This is very usual in Italy. You will not find that in Low Countries. So you have a box, and inside the box, your instruments, and you can close it after playing it on a table. Very often, the wood used in Italy are cypress because they have so many cypress. Here, once again, you have a polygonal spinet, a bit longer. It means with another pitch. And many of these precious instruments, Italian instruments, are preserved in Leipzig. Now a shape in wing shape form, en aile d'oiseau. And I show you this one also because evidently some amateurs were found of very good decoration. Professional musicians, not so much. They do not care and do not need it. But if you are an amateur, very rich, and you play music as an otium, as a pleasure, you will like to have a nice decoration. And these decorations were very often made after engravings. And I see here I could find the source that inspired the painter, you see. It is preserved in the Louvre, and it is much more earlier than the time the spinet was done. You see, the spinet is from Girolamo Zenti in 17th century, but the model copied is from the end of the Renaissance. I come now to an aspect that I love, is to understand who practiced these instruments. I said professional don't care for decor, but look, here we have a wonderful triple auto portrait of Sophonisba Anguissola. Who was this lady? She was a painter, a professional painter. This is not usual at that time, that a lady is strong enough to become an artist. And she's famous until today. And she portrayed herself doing a painting, but she portrayed herself twice again playing a very nice Italian virginal. You don't think it is interesting? And it is so precise. We can see the very small key on the right and the way she's putting the fingers on the keyboard. If you want to learn more about technique, look such good paintings. The same is with Lavinia Fontana. Look, she was just before to be married, and she abandoned the work, she abandoned the métier de peintre when she married, typical. And she's in a studiolo, and she's playing a very big squared spinet, you know, with the keyboard inside and with a box. And on the right, Marietta Robusti, she was the nephew of the very famous painter Veronese. And she's also doing an autoportrait with her own spinet. Look, is it not nice to know that very educated persons like painters and even female painters played spinet in Italy? But there is also cortegiana. You know, we very think that only in Orient cortegiana are playing very finely music. No, in Venice also. And There is even a book, Abito delle Cortegiane, and they play lute, they play harpsichord and spinet. The spinet is also a symbol of concordia. It means good understanding in the family. And it is a reason of these so many concerts, like for example here from Leandro Bassano, who a family with all the ages, from a child to a grandfather, you know, very, very old. And they are all singing and playing together. And very often the mother, the lady mother, is at the spinet. And finally, there is real concerts or so-called concerts. Here it is a bit unrealistic, you know, in a landscape, but otherwise a grouping for such a broken concert is quite usual. Now we come to the Italian harpsichords, and if we want to characterize harpsichords in Italy, we should know that it is built from the first board underneath. You know, you construct like a play. You construct your instruments from the how do you call that board underneath, and you put the blocks and then the ribs around. Another feature is that very often the instruments is in cypress, even the soundboard, and there is quite always, not always, but quite always only one keyboard, maybe with two 8/4, but one keyboard. And because of the calculation of the music proportions, instruments in Italy are very long, and if you the first glance to such instruments, you think, it should be Italian. The very fine molding are also characteristic, and there is often also intarsie on the box along the instrument to decorate it. Otherwise, it is a box, and the box is painted with motifs or mythological subjects. Here you have a diagram published by Frank Herbert, and you see the proportion of the string lengths. You see that the keyboard can have 2 rows of jacks, and what is very prominent is the many molding all around the instrument. The reason of Atlas der Profil from Elvig. What I think interesting also is to see how the inner structure is conceived. You see, it is quite light. There is many small équerres, square pieces of wood along the curved rib, and everything is very thin, very light. It means that instruments will have a very strong resonance, very immediate resonance. Here is the same type of drawing from Kotick, you know, later made, showing also that the bearing, the ribs under the soundboard are so small, so thin. And on the right, it shows how the ribs are blocked, you know, with some, the structure is not heavy. We have the luck to have 2 or 3 documents showing makers. I can say to you, it is not often. And here it is a wonderful picture preserved in London. And maybe it is De Rossi, the maker. You know, we should study the molding and the type of decoration at the front of the keyboard. And I think it is quite a unique piece. Look what he's holding in the left hand. It is a compass. It means I am a maker, okay, but I am also an intellectual because I calculate my proportions. The proportions of the instrument, of the string lengths. So I am not only I would say, a practical man. I am also a conceptor. And here I show you a beloved document from me, because this young lady is regulating his own spinet. You see what she's doing? She's caring for a plectrum. I love that document. And we see on the table a piece of, comment on appelle ça, une plume, you know, a feather prepared to be used for a plectrum. I am fond of that document. There is also not only portraits of makers, but caricatures. And here I show you two makers, you know, today preserved in the Vaticano. We don't have instruments from them, but they look quite normal people. A second one, quite young on the left, and later in his life, you know. And this Pierleone Ghezzi is very, very famous for his sketches of all the people of the society, but also of musicians, and they are terrible, these caricatures. There is a big book on him, a wonderful monograph on all his work. Among the documents recently published, there is this manuscript, you know, who is about instrument making. And I only show you the 2 pages on harpsichord making. There is the tools, the hand tools, and there is on the right, you know, the proportions of a cembalo. I love that. It is, once again, not very often that we have such documents. It is quite late also. And another aspect of Italian making is that if we compare Italy with France or Germany, in Italy, there is gorgeous painters who decorated harpsichords. You know, that there was a book published 20 years ago about the decoration of organs in Europe. And each land had to make a selection of instruments. And Italy, as cases for organs, they had hundreds of them. And by the major painter in Venice, from, I would say, Tiziano to Veronese to, so unbelievable. And here, what happened is that sometimes the instrument later was destroyed, but not the cover, not the lid. So the lids of harpsichords are preserved, for example, here in London in the National Gallery, because it is from Annibale Carracci, a very, very prominent painter, you see, at the end of the 16th century. And the same in Amsterdam, in the Rijksmuseum, they have among 10 of these harpsichord lids from not so well-known painters, but quite gorgeous. So you see, we are quite happy to have preserved this Silenus gathering grapes. It is wonderful. But in 2 pieces, you see. I gave very few energy to select some portraits of musicians, composer, but for Italy, Pasquini is one of the best. And you see he's playing an harpsichord on a table, and that harpsichord is in a case, probably covered with leather. This is usual. If you go to the museum in Roma, you will see wonderful harpsichords from Italy covered with a very thin red leather. Here we see that even more in detail. Look, these are the professional musicians of the Medici court. They are all identified. I will not spend time to say you the names, but we know who they are. And we see very well the type of instrument and the box and the way it is preserved with this red leather. I think we could make a short break, maybe now. I am at the end of Italy.
Okay, Florence, I was thinking while you make your pause, I could try to translate a little bit. I have written some notices for myself. So for our audience, if there is someone who doesn't understand quite well English, I could, while you do your pause, I can try to tell the most important things that you said. Is it okay?
Yeah, it is okay for me.
Okay, fine. Okay, I won't tell any lies. Okay, don't worry.
Okay. So I let you know what I show you on the screen is a lead of an harpsichord. The instrument is lost and it is preserved in Nuremberg.
Okay.
And I love it because they are drinking with us.
Okay, fine.
So I let you speak. Do you
Okay,
want
thank you.
maybe I stop to share?
Okay, yeah, it's great. Okay. Bom, minha gente, enquanto a professora Florence faz a sua pausa, enquanto ela estava falando, eu fiz algumas anotações aqui. Isso não estava programado, mas a gente se deu conta, né, de que pode haver gente que esteja assistindo, que tem interesse no assunto, mas que tem uma certa dificuldade com o inglês, né? Então, eu vou falar as ideias principais aqui. Eu acho que a primeira coisa importante que ela fala é a respeito da emoção na pesquisa. Isso é muito importante, né? E ela chama atenção para que a gente olhe sempre para aquilo que já foi feito antes. Isso é muito importante. Então, ela começou a aula dela trazendo títulos, né, da historiografia do assunto. Então, ela cita o Raymond Russell, né, que tem documentos super importantes. Ela aponta o fato de que é um livro dividido por regiões e que, mesmo sendo um livro antigo para a gente, que o apêndice ainda é muito importante, não é ultrapassado, ainda é muito útil. Ela própria ainda consulta o apêndice. Depois ela fala do Frank Herbert, né? Ele fez o seu seu PhD no assunto, é músico, construtor e intelectual, e é um dos nomes importantes, né, no início da restauração dos instrumentos. Em 1967, ele foi a Paris e teve contato com uma pessoa muito importante, que foi a Madame de Chambure, museóloga, e tinha uma coleção de muitos instrumentos, promovia concertos, e ela foi a curadora do museu do conservatório. E nesses 2 anos que ele ficou em Paris, ele deu cursos com a Madame de Chambure, e uma das pessoas influenciadas foi o Claude Mercier-Itier. E, posteriormente, o Hubert Bedard, que pode ser considerado o sucessor de Herbert. Depois, ela menciona um outro livro, de 1985, do Friedemann Helwig, construtor de violino, estudou química e que depois foi o restaurador, foi uma pessoa importante no ateliê do Museu Alemão em Nuremberg, o Germanisches Nationalmuseum, né? Aí ela fala uma ideia que é muito importante, que ela acha que a conservação é mais importante do que a restauração. Ela chama atenção também, ela mostrou aquelas imagens, aqueles desenhos, né, do lado direito da tela, são as moldagens, e ele traz no livro dele as moldagens, né, de construção. E ela chama atenção para o fato de que a moldagem é uma assinatura do construtor, né? Depois, um livro mais recente, de 2003, do Edward Kotick, que é indispensável. Ela recomenda absolutamente que a gente tenha, que a gente compre. Se eu não me engano, tem um exemplar na biblioteca da Escola de Música do UFRJ. Ele oferece uma visão cronológica, e o que é importante, ela chama atenção para... No século XVII, ele aponta o que seria uma construção internacional do cravo, que ele aborda, ao invés de separar as escolas de maneira estanque, de maneira rígida, né, ele considera essa mistura das faturas. Então, ela acha que isso é um aspecto bem importante. Depois, só um minutinho, agora eu não estou entendendo as minhas anotações aqui, vamos seguir adiante. Depois ela aborda, desculpa, ela menciona duas publicações mais recentes, a do Mark Kroll, que tem uma introdução maravilhosa do John Coster, que ela diz que é um dos maiores experts sobre o assunto, sobre construção de cravos. E, bom, eu queria lembrar, ela não falou, mas eu que estou lembrando, que aqui tem um capítulo nesse livro importante do nosso colega Pedro Persone, que fala do cravo na América do Sul, né? Depois, uma surpresa para nós, ela menciona o nosso livro Cravo no Rio de Janeiro do século XX, menciona a obra da Mayra, do cravo ao pianoforte, então nós ficamos muito honrados com essa menção, foi de surpresa total. Muito bem, depois ela menciona o livro de Bolt e Moltz e do Hubert Henkel, de 1979, e ela chama atenção para o fato, quer dizer, que certas obras que são catálogos são muito importantes, são às vezes difíceis de ler, muito científicos, tal, mas ele trabalhou na coleção de Leipzig, que tem uma grande coleção de instrumentos italianos, século XVII, etc. Então, é outra obra que ela recomenda. E os catálogos de três lugares, do Museu de Boston, também da autoria do John Coster, que ela considera um dos melhores catálogos, o de Londres e o de Bruxelas, em que especialmente os cravos Hookers são abordados. Depois ela mostrou rapidamente o Nicanon Saltério, o manuscrito do Arnaud de Zola, de 1440, e aí o que é interessante, né, é que esse manuscrito mostra duas possibilidades de mecanismo, né, o mecanismo pinçado e o mecanismo de martelos. Muito bem. Depois... deixa eu ver se eu não estou... Depois tem uma imagem interessante, numa catedral de Manchester, de um anjo tocando um clavecimbal e a gente vê os jacks, é um relevo do século XV. Depois ela mostra o Virdum, de 1511, depois o Pretórios, de 1619, e a obra do Pretórios é interessante não só por ele ter sido compositor, como também ele traz as medidas, né? Depois ela traz fotos de instrumentos preservados, né? Instrumentos italianos que estão na coleção de Leipzig, século XVI e XVII, aquele cravo Centi, de 1637, que está em Bruxelas. Aí ela traz um pensamento importante para nós, né? Que, em geral, os instrumentos muito decorados eram instrumentos de amadores, ricos, que o músico ele não estava tão interessado na decoração, mas sim no som do instrumento, né? E é interessante, ela mostra no slide, ela achou o original, a obra pintada original que deu origem à pintura do tampo do instrumento. E esse original está no Louvre. Depois ela mostra retratos dos músicos e interessantes três imagens, né, três olhos de três cravistas que eram nobres, e tanto pintores como também cravistas, então Anguissola, Fontana e Robusti, que tanto tocavam quanto pintavam e fizeram seus autorretratos, sendo que a Robusti era sobrinha do importante pintor Veronese. Também interessante, ela mostra uma imagem de uma cortesã, então as cortesãs também tocavam. Outra imagem da concórdia familiar, através da música, ou seja, a paz, o entendimento familiar através da música, e um broken concert, então essas foram as imagens dos músicos. Depois ela entra no assunto, né, dos cravos italianos, comentando que os cravos começavam a ser construídos pela base, e usando cipreste, instrumentos de um teclado, e falou a respeito da moldagem, que eu não estou entendendo a minha anotação, então vamos seguir. Depois, ela mostrou os raros portréis de construtores, caricaturas também, uma jovem regulando a espineta no século XVII, e depois um belo quadro do Pasquini, né, do Bernardo Pasquini, com um cravo coberto com couro vermelho. Aliás, ela aponta como uma característica de muitos instrumentos italianos. Então, acho que basicamente é isso. Então, vamos aguardar a professora Florence voltar para dar prosseguimento à segunda metade do seu curso. Lembrando a vocês que, ao final da palestra dela, vocês podem colocar perguntas, comentários no chat, serão super bem-vindos, né? E quando terminar a aula da professora Florence, a gente vai às 17 horas, desculpe, vamos dar prosseguimento com uma mesa redonda de um assunto que nos concerne a todos, que é publicando sobre música no Brasil, né? Outra coisa importante é que, para aqueles que necessitam de certificado, e eu recomendo muito, isso eu sempre falo para os meus alunos, é sempre importante a gente poder comprovar aquilo que a gente participa, né, cursos de que a gente participou, etc. Então, não deixem de assinar a lista de presença. Cada sessão vai ter uma lista de presença, é fácil, tem um link, vai estar o link no chat, vocês preencham para ganharem o certificado no final, né? Tanto os alunos que estejam matriculados formalmente nas várias instituições, como também o público de um modo geral, poderá ganhar certificado, não há necessidade de incluir instituição que participa, então todos são bem-vindos e teremos prazer em emitir certificados a todos. Tá? Florence, est-ce que tu es là déjà? On continue?
J'active mon micro, vous m'entendez?
Oui, je t'entends.
Il faut qu'on m'autorise à mettre ma vidéo, parce que vous m'avez interdit ma vidéo.
Non, moi non. Non, pas du tout. Voilà.
Voilà.
Bienvenue.
C'est bon?
C'est bon, c'est bon.
Alors,
bon, merci.
Vous n'êtes pas épuisés tous? Peut-être vous êtes morts de fatigue? Mais...
No, Florence, we continue in English, please.
Okay, I continue in English. So now I share my screen once again. Okay? Okay, are you all there? Can you see?
It's fine, thank you.
Okay. So, chin chin. Now we go forward with the Low Countries. And what is very astonishing is that the very first preserved virginal built in Antwerpen is in the shape of a polygonal spinet. Antwerpen, what is this city today in Belgium, but in former times in Low Countries? It was a very important port where an international how do you say, a port exchanging goods from everywhere in the world made this city very rich. And it was a place where there was many customers for harpsichords and for virginals. It is the reason why it was so flourishing at the end of the 16th century and for 3 centuries. Johannes Karest give us something very interesting. First, the instrument has an inside keyboard, as you see. We already saw that in Italy. And what is new is that there is a Latin inscription around the ribs. And, we do not have time, but there is always on Low Countries instruments some motto. Motto is a phrase, a sentence with a moral meaning. And very often it is to say that music is a help in our life, that music brings peace and is something lovely. The second aspect, very interesting, is that the roses, as you see, are all also a bit like for the clavicitherium preserved in London, in a Gothic form, you see, a sort of late Gothic element. And it is carved in wood and not carved directly in the wood of the soundboard, but apart and then glued inside the instrument. You see, this sentence is all around the instrument. It's quite very special. What I like is that we find exactly the same type of instrument once again in an auto-portrait from Christina von Emerson. You see, she's a painter and she's a spinet player. And there is also a sentence, omnia dat dominum, not habet ergo minus sit. It is religious and confident, you know, with a religion. So this is for the, I would say, the social aspect of the use of such instruments. A second shape of spinet is this very famous and typical from Antwerpen, rectangular big virginals. And I want to show you that before the dynasty of Röckers, there was other makers. Here, for example, Hans Boos. Quite often, German makers immigrated in Antwerpen. And this one is preserved in the royal monastery of Santa Clara in mid-Spain. It means that they were transported quite far away. And this comes also from politic reasons, you know, when Spain and Low Countries were under the same power, this helped naturally the exchanges of goods and of luxurious goods like virginals. An aspect very typical is that such instruments were built as a case, not put inside a case like in Italy, and to have an instrument quite nice outside, the makers used printed papers prepared with wood blocks and with the same motif going around the instrument. Here, hippocampus, and it is quite nice as a form. And you can find it also on a wall or on book bindings, and it is on instruments. It is very quickly glued, and it is later a bit more brown, not so clear, you see. So this is quite usual. And the instruments can be in spruce or in very light and white wood, not the same wood. It is clear that genuine woods were used in each school of making. Tilleul, es ist linden, I do not know in English, lind tree. The second aspect, quite visible, is that you have a wonderful landscape on the cover of the lid inside, and very often you will see it is outside music making, drinking together, flirting together. It means happy to be in the life. Here you have people dancing, and this is from another maker, also quite known in Antwerpen. He used once again an engraving, you know, from an artist to decorate the instrument. It is not an original composition. When we speak about instruments made in Antwerpen, there is one prominent dynasty, the dynasty of the Röckers. We are lucky enough that Grant O'Brien, who is a maker, an harpsichordist, a scholar, who worked in Edinburgh his whole life long, gave us in 90 the monograph on the Röckers. And you see all the chapters. It is a wonderful work, not replaced today. He studied in the archives. He used many works done before by different scholars. But because he was a scientist first, he had a very systematic spirit, and he studied the the types of instruments, the stringing and the pitches, the Heine constructions, and the compass, etc. It is a wonderful book. Because you are first players and musicians, please read the chapter on music and performance practice. The second half of the book is the systematic catalogue of instruments with the name ruckus, but also a list very argumented of unauthentic ruckus instruments. It is exactly like for Stradivari. Stradivari was so famous and so good that he was imitated since he was living, and it is the same for the ruckus. There is many imitations, forgeries, or mix of original pieces with modern pieces made already in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century. After that enormous book from Grant O'Brien, the last one, but also very important, is the systematic catalogue. I already mentioned it, from the ruckus published by the MIM in Brussels, Musée des Instruments de Musique. It is a group work, and first, before this catalogue, there is a lot of very good articles written by prominent scholars, for example, John Costers, Alain Anselme, and many other people. And there is also in that book, what is fantastic for us, analysis of how the roses were made, because you will see it was the first time that makers signed the instrument with a rose in metal. There is also an acoustic study. There is an analysis of the wood to understand the provenance of the woods, and they came from the mountains along the rivers and went to Antwerpen on the water, you know. And that book is very important for us because I think it is the first time that there is a specific catalogue on keyboards from only one maker or one dynasty. What is this dynasty? I show you here all the names. Hans, the eldest, Johannes Ruckers, then Andreas Ruckers first, Andreas second. What is quite difficult is that very often when a maker died, the son used for a period the same rose than the father. So there is a period in between where it is not clear who did it. And very often the son is imitating the father and using the rose. So you can understand how complicated it is sometimes to attribute one instrument. What is quite clear is that probably this big workshop with many workers worked already with a methodology showing that some persons were doing a specific task. What is wonderful is that Grant O'Brien noticed that all instruments have marked, and these marks are explaining the length of each model, very small, bit bigger, even longer, and very long. And they wrote, for example, 6 voet. The voet is the foot in Antwerpen. It is a way to measure a foot. And the biggest instruments are in 6 voet, and the smallest in 2.5 voet. It means that the whole dynasty numbered each specimen, and Grant O'Brien calculated that probably there was 85 instruments produced a year in that big workshop. It means an enormous amount of instruments. If you look at the dates, during 1.5 centuries, because Johannes Couchet, as I wrote, is the grandson of the very first Hans Ruckers, and he learned by Johannes. So it is the same workshop, I could say. And we are very lucky that by Sotheby's, a portrait by Couchet was suddenly proposed some years ago. I was so happy about that, because we have no face, no portrait of the others. Okay, on the left, you have the number of instruments in MIMO, this very useful database from museum, musical instruments museum online. And look how many instruments are preserved today and integrated. It does not mean that they are all in MIMO. MIMO is not complete. MIMO is only the repertory of a certain amount of museums. They are not all inside. But we see that Johannes, we have the maximum of instruments preserved for Johannes, and Andreas the First. Many of them are in Leipzig, quite many in Brussels, and then you see the numbers, 10 in the Musée de la Musique. Okay, so there is different types of virginal. The biggest is the 8-fret virginal. You see that the keyboard is inside and a bit on the left. What is also very special is already said. It is the paper glued, it is the motto written on the lead, and the way to decorate the soundboards. In Italy, you have nothing on the soundboard, no decoration. In Low Countries, you have a painting made with tempera, it means with color and eggs, without varnish. And the reason is that the makers were part of a guild, an association of makers, and belonging to them were also the painters. Painters and makers were in the same association to work, you know, the famous guilds. You could not work without having your master Prüfung, also how do you say, you had to be proved by the professionals before to establish yourself in a workshop. And in the same guild, there was painters very often collaborating for the decoration of the instruments. And many makers married daughters of painters. So this explains also a certain good collaboration between all the métiers. Here you have a view from these printed papers from very near. And on the right, you see how the roses were treated. It is in metal, usually with an angel or with a figure of symbolizing music. And there is the initials of the makers. HR means Hans Ruckers. ER, Johannes Ruckers, Jan Ruckers. And around, there is this very fine tempera paintings with flowers. And because Low Countries are very famous for their tulips and bulbs, the same flowers are represented on the soundboards. Many engravings with models of flowers circulated. It means that painters were using the same engraved models. Here I show you two types of big 6-fret virginals. One on the left is a normal virginal, the spinet. And the other one is a muslach. The muslach is with a keyboard on the right. It means the tone is more nasal because the plucking point of the string is near to the nut. I am sure you understand what I mean. It is like with a guitar. If you play very near to the bridge, you will have a more nasal tone. So it is the same on the harpsichord. Here a second muslach. The paper is quite destroyed, you know. And here you see a rose from one side and the other side. Here, I took that table in Grant O'Brien because it is very interesting to see the length of the instruments, the number of width, 6, 5, 4, 4, 2, 2.5. And Grant O'Brien is reproducing the many lengths and types of virginals. It's wonderful to know that, you know. And each type has a number that you can find inside the instrument. And it means it is not very difficult to calculate how many models were made and how many from each model. Now, if we look at how, where was that instruments played, we have many engravings with Frau Musica in German, the allegory of music. It means usually a lady with a crown of laurel playing among other musicians. And as you see, she has a virginal polygonal. Here too, look, Musica, once again with a Latin sentence telling that the soul is very happy to have this music, because when you have a misery feeling or you are sad, play your virginal and you will be happy. A second use is very often religious paintings. For example, Santa Cecilia is not only playing organ or a harp or lute, but very often a spinet. And here it is clear that this artist, Michael Coxey, worked also in Low Countries and painted an instrument from Antwerpen. Another subject very often where you see virginals played by women is the foolish virgins. You know, on the left are the foolish virgins. They are doing music, they are drinking wine, they are playing cards, they are amoral. And on the right, you have the good virgins cooking and working for the house. This is a very actual subject, I think. This is also the same subject, a bit different. It is a prodigal son among the courtesans. And what is doing the courtesans? Once again, like in Italy, she's playing a virginal. So you see the morality and the immoral value of making music on a virginal. Here too, it is the same. There is a long text underneath to explain that this party in the house of the bad rich man is not moral, but people were buying such prints with pleasure, even if it is amoral. You see, once again. So it is important, I think, that you understand how the representation of such instruments was circulating. We see here Concordia is in a family, you play together. And here, what is very nice is that a person is dead, but there is a portrait on the wall, and the young lady is sitting with an instrument decorated at the side with two birds, and it is a present made to her, this virginal, when she married her husband. It is very, very nice. I don't have a detail of the decoration, but it is quite lovely. Another way also to show Concordia in the family is when you have the whole persons around the table and a young lady is playing the spinet. It is very typical, and this one is preserved in Amsterdam. And you see, like very often in Protestant countries, there is once again a sentence on the painting. Here you have a lady. She's identified. She was very rich, very educated. Look at all the golden objects on the board, and it means she was extremely rich. She had extremely many children, and she's playing a big virginal. Here, another subject is the 4 ages of the life. And you see, it is always a young lady who is playing that instrument. It explains the name virginal. It is probably the origin of the term virginal. And you have here, the contrary of the, I am tired, of the first lady I showed you. Here you have a very moral lady at home, a bit Protestant, I think. Not very attractive. I would like to come now to another model, not yet presented, of a virginal and a small virginal, what they called a mother and child. You have here a specimen preserved in Nuremberg, and you will see the child is on the right in a drawer. You can take it out and you can play it with 2 persons, eventually a child and a real person. And what is interesting is you can put also the small one on the big one, and playing on the first keyboard, you will put in motion the jacks of the small one. I do not know if you already saw such an instrument, but some people are telling that it is maybe the invention of the 2 keyboard in harpsichord. I am not sure, but what is clear is that you could play them together. And the reason is that if you look underneath, you see that the jacks are touchable by the other keyboard. So if you play the big keyboard, you play also the small keyboard together. There is an accouplement, and it means you played the 6 wet and the 2.5 wet together. Or this, I think it is a 3 wet, the small one. Look here, it is a bit differently displayed, but it is the same system. And there is quite many in the world because they were so special, there were special orderings that they were a lot decorated, very often for prominent patrons, and they are preserved in the metropolitan, in Milano, etc. Look, Castello Sforzesco, for example. And what is quite clear is that the same painter probably painted all of them. Look, they are all with landscapes in gardens. They are all with companies who are playing, drinking in the garden. Look, I found so many, and I think it was a special workshop for the decoration. Okay, not least, there is also a type of instruments quite very special. It is a harpsichord, and inside the curve of the harpsichord, a small virginal, octave virginal. This one is from Johannes Rückers, but there is no date. It is preserved in Berlin. And here you can see how it is arranged with this drawing, how they are using the same case. It is very complicated with all these nuts and bridges. Later, I showed you a harpsichord with only 1 keyboard, and here this specimen has 2 keyboards and a virginal. And what is wonderful is that the decoration on the lid is exactly the same composition than a painting by Martin de Vos, preserved in Brussels. So you see how near were the makers and the painters. Harpsichord by the Rückers. I show you one of the very, very few preserved in the original state. It is in Nuremberg. It was not transformed. It has the original keyboard and pitch, and it was not enlarged. The decoration is authentic. You see, it is a sort of imitation of a metal decoration, but it is painted on the wood. It's quite special. C'est un trompe-l'œil, we say that in French. And I love that instrument because I think if you want to play spelling, it would be a wonderful model. Here you see the structure of these Flemish harpsichords. They are much more solid than the harpsichord in Italy. And you see the bracing is quite important for the case, but also for the soundboard. And there is many renforts because the instrument is also with more important ribs, you know, and it is constructed first the box and then inside the bars. It is not made at all in the same way than in Italy. You see here how heavy and consequent the instruments are. In the society, you have many of these paintings with a young professor or a young man and a young lady. And look at the stand. This is also quite typical, this big turned foot to put the harpsichord on it. It is very often that during the centuries we lost all the feet of harpsichords, and they are ugly. They were made mainly in 19th century later. Here, what I love is to have once again a lady. You notice that she's playing standing up. It means the instrument is quite high, and you have also a decoration imitating marble this time, not iron, but marble. It is quite usual when you don't want papers. This is the cheapest way. You have false marbles, and inside the lid, you can have here probably the contest between Marsyas and Apollon, or a musical subject. It is quite usual. Here I show you the extension of the keyboard. Because it is unbelievable. You see that it was enlarging permanently, and during the record's time, you have to stay in the middle of this diagram, and progressively at the end of the 17th century, you will have the broken les feintes brisées. I forget the English term suddenly, short octaves, excuse me. And we will look at that later because many of the record instruments were transformed later because their keyboards were too small for the new music. There was I will finish with England, because England was one of the first land to import many of the record instruments, and even makers settled in London, in Edinburgh, in England, everywhere, coming from Low Countries. It is the reason why so many names of the preserved instruments in England have names from Low Countries. So all these are built in London, but by Flemish makers, probably. And I will stop today with this wonderful piece, not unique, there is some others in Germany, but it is a clavi-organum. It means an organ and a harpsichord with the same block, working or apart or together. And this was wonderful for organists to have such instruments, or for power persons with a lot of money to play at home. So here is the end of my first course, and I hope you are not totally died from my speaking and my bad English. Okay.
Not at all, Florence. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. And if you want, I can do the same, a little resume, and then very shortly, and you make a little pause, and then we come to the questions.
Yeah. So.
Or comments, or
Yeah.
Okay. Well, bom, então, minha gente, vamos fazer a mesma coisa. Eu vou tentar ser bem sucinto aqui e resumir o que a professora Florence falou, e aí depois a gente passa aos comentários, as perguntas, e eu acho que a gente tem um pouquinho de tempo. Então, ela entrou no assunto de Países Baixos, mostrou um virginal e citou a cidade de Antuérpia, né, e sua importância como porto, o que significava um grande intercâmbio internacional. Depois, a questão da rosácea, né, do cravo de forma gótica, como já tinha acontecido no plebiscitério, mostrou autorretratos, também como aconteceu na Itália, né, de novo, executantes que também pintavam, né, e citou o nome Catarina von Renascença. E aqui, ao contrário da Itália, os instrumentos já eram construídos em uma caixa e não colocados em uma caixa, né? Aí ela mencionou o papel usado como decoração, quer dizer, pela rapidez, eles eram colados e mais barato do que pintura ou outros procedimentos. A utilização da picéia, que é uma conífera, né, madeira utilizada, e novamente, como ela mostrou na Itália, a pintura do tampo inspirada em uma outra pintura anterior, né? Aí ela menciona um livro muito importante sobre a família Hookers, né, dos Grant O'Brien, pesquisador, cravista, etc., um livro de 1990, que ela considera o livro sobre os Hookers e que ainda não foi substituído. E ela recomenda que nós, instrumentistas, né, que nos dediquemos a um capítulo especial, capítulo 12, que fala da música e da performance, da sua prática. O livro tem um aspecto interessante, que assim como os violinos Stradivarius, mesmo não músicos sabem a importância de Stradivarius, né, virou um nome conhecido, que a mesma coisa acontecia com a família Hookers, dos instrumentos falsos, instrumentos que eram imitados. E também com essa importante família de construção dos Hookers, foi a primeira vez que surgiram as rosáceas assinadas, né? Bom, muito bem. Depois, outro aspecto interessante é que, muitas vezes, quando o construtor morria e o filho assumia o ateliê, ele, durante algum tempo, ele usava a mesma rosácea que o pai, quer dizer, como se fosse a mesma assinatura, né? O que muitas vezes dificulta o reconhecimento, a datação, né, de certos instrumentos. O O'Brien faz uma lista de 1540 a 1655 dos instrumentos construídos. Foram muitos instrumentos Hookers, né? Há muitos instrumentos, muitos preservados, como ela mostrou. Ela mostrou também uma coisa rara, que é um retrato do Ian Coucher. Foi um retrato que ela encontrou na Sotheby's, né? A companhia, a loja dos leilões, né? E justamente a publicação da Nimo, que ela mencionou antes, ali encontra-se uma lista dos instrumentos preservados. Muito bem. Depois, uma coisa interessante é o teclado interno, é uma característica, né, aliás, melhor dizendo, dos virginários, é o teclado interno. E uma coisa interessante também, ela menciona a relação, a facilidade da colaboração entre os construtores, entre os luthiers e os pintores, porque eles estavam na mesma associação, na guild. Então, daí se explica a boa colaboração. Rosácea de metal, com as iniciais, é uma característica, e esses modelos eles eram de gravura e circulavam, né? Então encontra-se muitas vezes o mesmo modelo repetido. O O'Brien novamente mostra tipos diferentes, tamanhos, e nas imagens a semelhança com o que ela mostrou na Itália, a gente encontra as alegorias da música, temas religiosos, a Santa Cecília é mostrada tocando não órgão, mas virginal, ou espineta, temas morais como as Foolish Virgins, quer dizer, ou cortesãs, ou a situação de concórdia, daquela harmonia familiar. Então, um instrumento como presente de casamento, um ambiente familiar, e ela menciona que o nome virginal vem de virgem mesmo. Depois ela mostra aqueles instrumentos super interessantes, que são mãe e filho, né? São dois virginais, quer dizer, um pequeno e um grande, e o pequeno como se fosse uma gaveta, que muitas vezes pode ser retirado e colocado em cima. E há um sistema como se fosse acoplamento no cravo. E aí é possível que essa seja a origem do acoplamento nos instrumentos de dois teclados. As pinturas são semelhantes. Depois ela mostrou um cravo com virginal, que está no Museu de Berlim, um cravo com virginal que está em Bruxelas, mas com dois teclados. Ela mostrou também a pintura que inspirou. Depois ela mostrou um pequeno Hookers, que é o único que está completamente preservado no Museu de Nuremberg. Depois alguns retratos destacando uma moça tocando de pé. E ela chamou atenção também para o aspecto da decoração, que nem sempre são os papéis, mas aqui, nesse caso, era uma decoração imitando mármore, né? o que é chamado de trompe-l'œil. Depois ela mostrou uma interessante tabela com a extensão dos instrumentos, né? E a extensão era permanentemente aumentada, né? Começa muito pequeno e depois vai naturalmente crescendo, né? A questão da oitava curta ela mencionou, claro que seguindo a necessidade do repertório. Depois, rapidamente, ela mostrou a Inglaterra, que importava instrumentos dos Países Baixos e também construtoras. Ela mostrou alguns instrumentos que foram construídos na Inglaterra por construtores dos Países Baixos. E, finalmente, aquele exemplo muito interessante do clavier organo, que está no Victoria Albert, de Londres, e que pode ser assim, um instrumento interessante para organistas. Então, eu acho que esse que foi mais ou menos o resumo. Florence, je m'excuse si j'ai fait quelques fautes, mais j'ai fait des notices là. Je n'ai pas menti, hein, je n'ai pas inventé quelque chose, donc je fais honneur à tes paroles, je crois.
Tu es gentil comme tout. Tu sais, moi-même, j'ai dû faire des erreurs parce que je parle sans notes. Je n'ai pas écrit de texte. Donc,
oui, moi, je fais la même chose. Mais, thank you so much, Florence. And now we come to the questions.
Yeah.
First question, wait. Luciana Câmara, our colleague from harpsichord teacher from Recife, Pernambuco. She's curious about the material used for the strings and how has it changed throughout time.
I mean, this is a huge question. You listen to me? You can hear me?
Sorry, this was not the question from Luciana. This is a question from José Guilherme, our colleague who is helping us with the technique.
Yeah, I think it is a very complicated question. I would first say that we have some ideas about the strings when by chance an instrument was not touched since the period of use. For example, tomorrow for French instruments, we will see an instrument that I could, as a curator of the collection, buy directly in the house where it was in use in the 17th century. After the use, when it was old-fashioned, it was put under the roof and nobody cared for it 2 centuries long. When I found it, because the proprietor wanted to throw it away from the house, and I went with a colleague from the Musée Instrumental, we found on the, how do you say, help me, the metallic, les chevilles, where the strings are attached, there was small pieces of strings.
Cravelhas. Yes.
Yeah, still present. And it means we could make a very systematic depot of these samples and analyze them, and with specialists of metallurgy, for example. So it means more and more there is good studies to say, okay, there was iron, there was bronze, and where was the change? Also because at the end of the 18th century, makers stamped marks on the instrument to say when you had to change the type of metal and the diameter. It means maybe if you want, I will make a section in the bibliography on strings studies, because it is very important. It changed a lot the sonority. I will not summarize because it is a question in itself. But for example, in Washington, there was a very good specialist. Rémy Gug in Strasbourg was a very good specialist because he studied, he could not find so many elements in books on music and musical instruments. He found elements in metallurgy treatises on metal. So you have to open your mind to other disciplines if you want to study the stringing of instruments. I am not very precise, but it is sure that it was not stringed the same way in the bass, in the middle, and in the treble, for clear reasons of resonance and of diameter.
Bom, eu não vou poder traduzir tudo, mas o importante, aliás, eu não me lembro se eu já falei para vocês, para os interessados, a professora Florence vai disponibilizar uma bibliografia, o que a gente sabe o quanto que é importante. Então, até o final do curso, ela vai disponibilizar essa bibliografia e, naturalmente, a gente vai compartilhar com vocês, com os interessados. A gente depois vai avisar qual vai ser o melhor canal para isso. Mas, assim, sintetizando a pergunta, é que ela disse que esse assunto tão específico que merece uma sessão na bibliografia sobre o assunto, e ela vai, então, incluir. Ela menciona alguns especialistas, entre os quais o Rémy Gug, em Estrasburgo, e a pessoa, para estudar isso, também tem que estar aberta a outros campos, né, científicos, né? Mas que, possivelmente, quer dizer, vários tipos de cordas diferentes, material diferente no mesmo instrumento, por conta da ressonância e das regiões diferentes do instrumento. Agora sim, eu acho que a gente pode passar a pergunta da Luciana Câmara. Now, Florence, I translate the question made by Luciana Câmara, our colleague, harpsichord teacher in Pernambuco. What do you think about the use of historical instruments in recordings and concerts?
It is a complicated question. I was 25 years long a curator in a museum. And since that time, I am no more in charge with a public collection. I have very good friends who are private collectors, having very ancient instruments in their own propriety. And it is I would say two worlds. Why? Because when an instrument is belonging to you, it is your responsibility to decide how, by whom, how much you want to use an instrument. And you are responsible for I would say, an instrument can die. It is like a machine. when it is used, it will once a day die, because of the mechanisms. Okay, if you are responsible in a public collection, you have many duties together and very often contradictory. So in a museum, you have first to preserve, to study, to disseminate the knowledge, to have a place where models are preserved as long as we can. We are all conscious that if there is a bomb on a museum or a fire, it is destroyed, and it happens very often and more often than we believe. It means we are even more maybe obliged to be careful because we have a common responsibility. My opinion is, because I was so lucky working in that museum that I heard in the very early times, I was very young there, many of the instruments I even personally could, I would say, try them a bit when the museum was closed. And I welcomed many harpsichordists from Marcello generation to use them as students in the class of harpsichord in the conservatoire. It is no more possible. Why? Because we realized how many instruments suffered. And today the rules to let play historical instruments in public collections are much more strict. And the CIMSIM, it means the committee, International Committee for Musical Instruments Museums, wrote many years ago, 30 years ago, rules of access to damp, I would say, their use. Okay, this is a first question. Personally, I think an historical instrument at such a personality, such, I would say, it's like a painting. If you don't have the real object, you don't have the real feeling. So I am fond of historical sounds on historical instruments with historical touch, with historical technique, with historical style of interpretation. I would never accept that somebody with an athletic way playing modern pianos would suddenly jump on a virginal, for example. I would be frightened, totally frightened. But what I want to say is that there is also, so you will see my meaning is very mixed. There is also wonderful makers of today. And they are so precise. They try to be so near to the design, the proportions, the woods, the metals used for the strings, even the dampers, everything, that there is instruments wonderfully working because they are not used, and wonderfully with a wonderful voice because they are, I would say, at their top of sound when a good maker is caring for his instrument. You see, I am quite unclear, but what I want only to say to you, if you have the chance to meet a collector who is open-minded and generous, letting you work on very precious instruments, doing a recording, do it with respect. If you try to do that in a museum and you have difficulties because you see that the rules are very strong and very hard, and be patient, please, because we need in 1 century or 2 centuries, if there is no atomic bomb, to have some less touched and less used specimens. You know, the more this story is going on, the less we have samples not modified, not totally destroyed by the use. So you see, we need to have a temporized attitude. I hope it answers your question. I love historical instruments. They are unique.
Florence, thank you so much. I think we are coming to the end of this wonderful section. Many people wrote and thank you so much for the wonderful class and how much they enjoyed. And so, gente, desculpe, eu não vou poder ler as perguntas de todos, mas transmitir os agradecimentos, como vocês acabaram de ouvir. A gente vai encerrando essa sessão, porque daqui a pouco, às 17 horas, nós temos a mesa redonda. Então, naturalmente, estão todos convidados, aguardamos vocês. Florence, est-ce que tu veux dire quelque chose d'autre?
Je veux juste vous dire que j'espère qu'on se retrouve tous demain. Et demain, I am sorry, I hope that we meet once again tomorrow. And tomorrow I will concentrate on the French school of harpsichords, French making, but also the social aspects like today. And if you have any question, if you want that I create a section in the bibliography, write to me. You have my email, florence.getro@cnrs.fr. It was on the first screen. I am sure.
I will repeat. Então, quem tiver alguma pergunta, algum pedido especial em relação à bibliografia, pode escrever para ela, florence.getro@cnrs.fr. Okay? So, Florence, thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're all looking forward to the second course tomorrow. Thank you so much. Queria agradecer demais a todos que estão aqui com a gente. Venham amanhã, venham na mesa redonda agora às 17 horas. Agradecer novamente a José Guilherme, que está aqui dando suporte para a gente, a Mayra Margarida. Então, até breve, gente.
Alors, je vous dis à demain.
À demain. Merci.
Bye bye.